Africa's industrial map is being redrawn, and Ethiopia is right at the center of it. In a region once written off by colonial economists as permanently agrarian, the sound of machines now hums across the highlands. Textile mills in Hawassa, cement plants in Mugher, and industrial parks near Addis Ababa are stitching together a new economic story, one that giants like Aliko Dangote and China are betting billions of dollars on. This isn't just another investment trend, it's a declaration of intent that Africa's industrial age has begun and Ethiopia may be its engine. According to Reuters 2024, Ethiopia has become one of the fastest growing manufacturing hubs in Africa, attracting billions in foreign direct investment despite years of political turbulence. After decades of focusing on agriculture, the Ethiopian government's homegrown economic reform plan now prioritizes industrialization, infrastructure, and energy self-reliance. And leading this charge are two players who rarely miss a future-defining opportunity: Dangote Industries and China. Let's start with the African titan himself, Aliko Dangote. When Dangote first set foot in Ethiopia over a decade ago, he wasn't just scouting for cement markets. He was reading the terrain of Africa's next industrial giant. Today, the Dangote Cement Plant in Mugher, valued at over $600 million, stands as one of the largest in East Africa, a complex capable of producing millions of tons of cement each year. Dangote understood something most Western investors ignored: Ethiopia's 120 million strong population, its low-cost labor, and its abundance of natural limestone and energy resources created the perfect conditions for local production over import dependency. According to the African Development Bank, AFDB, Ethiopia has one of the youngest and most trainable workforces on the continent, while wages remain significantly lower than in Asia. This gives it a manufacturing cost advantage, an edge China once had and now seeks to relocate. Dangote's move wasn't just business, it was strategy. In interviews cited by Bloomberg 2023, he said Africa must build industries that process what it produces, and in Ethiopia, he found a government ready to make that vision real. But Dangote isn't the only one who sees Ethiopia's promise. China, Africa's biggest infrastructure partner, has been quietly laying the foundation for this industrial revolution for nearly 2 decades. From the Addis Ababa Djibouti Railway to the Eastern Industrial Zone, China's presence in Ethiopia is more than visible. It's structural. That railway alone, financed largely by Chinese loans and built by Chinese engineers, now moves goods from Ethiopia's inland factories to the Djibouti port in less than 12 hours, a journey that once took days. According to Xinhua News Agency 2024, over 400 Chinese companies are now operating in Ethiopia, employing hundreds of thousands of Ethiopians in sectors from textiles to electronics. The Hawassa Industrial Park, a flagship project designed with support from Chinese contractors, is now home to more than 20 apparel factories producing for global brands like H&M and PVH. But here's what's remarkable. This isn't just China investing in Africa. It's China betting on Africa's ability to industrialize itself. In recent years, Beijing's focus has shifted from simply building infrastructure to co-producing manufacturing capacity. Rather than extract raw materials, China now helps African countries build the factories that add value, a model that aligns perfectly with Ethiopia's Vision 2030. Now, imagine this: a continent where raw minerals are refined at home, where young Africans work in high-tech plants instead of exporting unprocessed ore, where African billionaires and foreign partners cooperate on African terms. That vision is slowly materializing, and Ethiopia has become the test ground. The World Bank, 2023, reports that Ethiopia's industrial output has tripled in the last decade, with manufacturing contributing over 17% of GDP, up from just 8% in 2010. Despite political instability, Ethiopia's investment climate remains resilient due to consistent infrastructure expansion and strong domestic demand. And that's exactly what excites Dangote and China alike: momentum. Both understand that economic gravity is shifting from west to east, and within Africa, from dependence to production. Many African commentators, especially in Pan-African forums, see this as part of a broader movement of economic decolonization, the idea that Africa must break free from exporting raw resources and instead build industries that keep wealth circulating within the continent. For Dangote, Ethiopia's example could be replicated across Africa: localized production, regional markets, and continental integration under the African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA. But the path isn't without challenges. Ethiopia faces inflation, foreign exchange shortages, and a need for political stability after years of internal conflict. Yet even here, there's cautious optimism. According to Al Jazeera, the Ethiopian government has recently reopened talks with international lenders while also reaffirming its developmental state model, one that prioritizes domestic capacity and gradual liberalization rather than full Western-style privatization. That's a position many African analysts applaud. It echoes what leaders like Captain Ibrahim Traoré have been saying across the continent. True sovereignty comes from controlling your production base. When Ethiopia invests in textile parks, power dams, and steel plants, it's not just building factories, it's building independence. And when figures like Dangote and nations like China invest there, they're not merely chasing profit, they're joining a continental shift, one where Africans are reclaiming ownership of their economic destiny. Let's look closer at what's happening on the ground. In the Eastern Industrial Zone near Addis Ababa, Ethiopian and Chinese engineers now work side by side, designing machinery and assembling goods once imported from Europe. According to UNIDO 2023, local sourcing in Ethiopia's manufacturing sector has risen by 30% in the last 5 years, meaning more materials and components are now made domestically instead of imported. That may sound technical, but it's revolutionary, because every percentage of local sourcing means more African value retained, more jobs created, and less dependence on foreign currencies. Ethiopia's government has also built a series of hydropower projects, including the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, GERD, now producing thousands of megawatts of electricity. Energy is the bloodstream of industrialization, and Ethiopia knows it. With GERD and other renewable energy sources, Ethiopia is on track to become East Africa's largest power exporter, providing clean electricity to neighboring nations like Sudan, Djibouti, and Kenya. For Dangote, that's a critical factor. His cement empire runs on energy, and cheap, reliable power can turn Ethiopia into one of the most competitive manufacturing hubs on the continent. Observers from the African Union Commission on Trade and Industry note that Ethiopia's industrial growth is not happening in isolation. It's tied to regional corridors, networks of rail, road, and ports linking landlocked countries to the Red Sea and Indian Ocean. That's why China's involvement matters. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, Beijing has financed not only Ethiopia's railways, but also the expansion of Djibouti's port, creating a seamless trade artery for African exports. Critics in the West often describe this as debt diplomacy, but African economists like Dr. Arkibi Okube, a former Ethiopian minister and senior advisor to the prime minister, argue that infrastructure debt used to build productive assets, railways, factories, energy grids, is investment, not burden. The question, he said in a Financial Times interview, is not whether Africa borrows, but what it borrows for. If we borrow to build value chains, we are investing in our freedom. That sentiment resonates deeply with Africa's sovereignty movement, from Burkina Faso to Ethiopia, where the goal is not isolation but autonomy through production. And that's the philosophy behind Dangote's cement, China's industrial parks, and Ethiopia's manufacturing leap, a shared belief that Africa can stand on its own feet when it builds its own base. But beneath the numbers and policies lies something deeper, a quiet revolution of mindset. For decades, Africa's economic destiny was shaped elsewhere, in Paris, London, and Washington. Now, in Addis Ababa, it's being shaped by Africans themselves. Take the Mojo dry port, for example. Once a dusty logistics outpost, it's now a critical node in Ethiopia's export chain. Every day, hundreds of containers loaded with cement, garments, and machinery roll down the Addis Djibouti Railway, much of it tied to projects by Dangote Industries and Chinese-backed manufacturers. According to Reuters 2024, Ethiopia's logistics efficiency has improved by nearly 40% since the port rail integration began. That improvement isn't just technical, it's symbolic. It shows that Africa can control its supply routes, its timelines, and its trade priorities. This transformation is what many African analysts call industrial sovereignty, the ability to produce, process, and transport goods independently of colonial-era trade systems. It's the same principle driving Captain Ibrahim Traoré's economic reforms in Burkina Faso and similar initiatives in Mali and Niger, policies that prioritize domestic production and regional trade over dependency on Western imports. Ethiopia's example proves that this isn't ideology, it's strategy. Dangote, ever the pragmatist, saw that strategy long ago. When he expanded his cement operations into Ethiopia, he didn't just build a factory, he integrated local ecosystems. According to the East African 2023, Dangote sources over 80% of raw materials for his Ethiopian plant locally, employing more than 2,000 Ethiopian workers directly and supporting thousands more through transport and supply chains. This approach aligns with the African Union's Agenda 2063, which envisions a continent producing what it consumes and consuming what it produces. Ethiopia, by hosting African-owned industrial giants alongside foreign partners like China, is showing what that vision looks like in reality. Even more striking is the technological transfer taking place. In the Eastern Industrial Zone, local engineers are now trained in modern assembly lines, welding automation, and machinery maintenance, skills once imported from abroad. According to UNCTAD 2024, over 70% of new technical graduates in Ethiopia now find employment in manufacturing, construction, or logistics, sectors that barely existed 2 decades ago. This represents not just job creation, but knowledge creation, the birth of a domestic industrial culture. But the story doesn't stop at factories and railways. Ethiopia's government is pairing its industrial push with a financial sovereignty strategy, one that gradually reduces over-reliance on Western finance. The African Development Bank reported in 2024 that Ethiopia has started denominating portions of its trade deals in Chinese yuan and Emirati dirhams, bypassing the volatility of the US dollar. This diversification, though subtle, marks a quiet shift toward monetary independence, a theme increasingly echoed across the continent. According to Al Jazeera 2024, more than 40 African countries have expressed interest in developing regional payment systems that allow direct settlements in local or partner currencies. For Ethiopia, which imports machinery and exports textiles and cement, this means smoother trade with its largest partners, China, the UAE, and neighboring African states. To African sovereignty advocates, this isn't just economics, it's liberation through finance. They argue that industrial independence means little if monetary dependency persists. Dangote himself often warns of this trap. In interviews with CNBC Africa, he said, "If we keep earning foreign exchange from exports but spend it on imports, we're only moving in circles. Real wealth stays when we produce what we consume." That's precisely what Ethiopia is now attempting. And it's a gamble both Dangote and China are backing with confidence. China's latest investments make that clear. In 2024, according to China Daily, Beijing signed new cooperation agreements with Ethiopia worth $1.6 billion, covering industrial parks, renewable energy, and logistics. Among the projects is a joint industrial innovation center, designed to train Ethiopian engineers in robotics, electronics, and smart manufacturing. Unlike earlier decades when Africa's partnership with foreign powers was extractive, this new wave is productive. Factories, not mines. Skills, not aid. That's the essence of Ethiopia's industrial leap, and the reason it has captured the attention of African policymakers. The Ethiopian Investment Commission reports that over 70% of Chinese investments in the country are now in manufacturing and processing rather than raw material extraction. That's a fundamental reversal of Africa's old role in the global economy. Many African observers interpret this as a sign that the global balance of economic power is shifting towards South-South cooperation, where developing nations partner as equals rather than subordinates. But how sustainable is Ethiopia's boom? That question worries even its most optimistic allies. Inflation remains above 25%. The Ethiopian birr continues to depreciate, and foreign exchange reserves are tight. The challenge lies in ensuring that industrial growth translates into long-term fiscal stability. Yet, Ethiopia's resilience has surprised many. Even after years of internal conflict, drought, and global supply shocks, its industrial parks continue to operate, exports are rising, and investors are not leaving. Why? Because the fundamentals are strong: cheap power, young labor, and a government committed to industrialization as a national mission. Observers often draw parallels with China in the 1980s, a country emerging from hardship but determined to industrialize through planning, infrastructure, and gradual openness. Ethiopia's model borrows from that playbook, but with an African soul. The Ministry of Industry and Trade has identified key export clusters: cement, textiles, leather, and agro-processing, all sectors where Ethiopia has natural advantages. Dangote's cement anchors construction, while Chinese textile and machinery firms fuel exports. Together, they create what economists call a synergistic industrial base, a system where each sector supports the others, from infrastructure to production to trade. Many African commentators see Ethiopia's progress as a lesson for the continent. If Ethiopia, a landlocked nation without vast oil reserves, can rise through manufacturing, what could happen if countries with more resources followed the same path? The idea is already spreading. Kenya is expanding its special economic zones. Nigeria has opened the Lekki Free Trade Zone, where Dangote's oil refinery, Africa's largest, now operates. In West Africa, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are shifting focus from exporting gold ore to refining it domestically. These are continental ripples of the same industrial awakening Ethiopia has sparked. And China, far from dominating the process, has become a strategic partner, providing tools, not orders. According to UNCTAD's 2024 Africa report, the majority of Chinese-funded projects in Africa now involve local joint ventures, skill development, and profit-sharing mechanisms. That's a far cry from the one-sided contracts of the early 2000s. It shows Africa is learning to negotiate from strength, choosing projects that align with long-term sovereignty. Still, not everyone is convinced. Western media often warns that China's influence in Ethiopia could lead to debt dependency. But as Ethiopian finance ministry officials have clarified, most of the current debts are tied to productive assets generating revenue, such as the Addis Djibouti Railway and hydropower stations. In fact, the country has already restructured several loans through transparent negotiations with lenders. That's a sign of agency, not subservience. And for Dangote, who's built his empire entirely from within Africa, Ethiopia's trajectory is proof that African capital can coexist, and even cooperate, with Asian investment without losing sovereignty. This is where the story takes on continental meaning, because Ethiopia's success is not just Ethiopia's. It challenges the entire global narrative that says industrial power must come from the West. According to Brookings Africa Growth Initiative 2024, Ethiopia's industrial output could triple again by 2035 if current trends continue, making it one of Africa's top 3 manufacturing economies alongside South Africa and Egypt. That projection might sound ambitious, but consider this. Every great industrial rise, from China to South Korea, began with a single decision: to believe in domestic production. Ethiopia has made that decision. Dangote and China have amplified it, and the rest of Africa is watching closely, because in every ton of cement from Mugher, every garment from Hawassa, and every shipment on the Djibouti Railway lies a message that Africa's age of production has begun. Yet perhaps the most profound change taking place in Ethiopia isn't found in steel or concrete, it's found in confidence. For the first time in generations, a new class of Ethiopian entrepreneurs is emerging, They're not just traders, they're manufacturers, engineers, and exporters. In the industrial parks surrounding Addis Ababa, young Ethiopians who once dreamed of working abroad are now managing assembly lines and production units. According to UNIDO, more than 80,000 local jobs have been created in Ethiopia's state-led industrial zones since 2018. Many of these workers are women, trained in technical skills once considered foreign to Africa's workforce. This transformation, from aid recipients to producers, is altering how Ethiopians, and indeed Africans, see themselves. It's what Pan-African thinkers have long called the psychological liberation of development, when a nation starts believing it can define its own destiny. And it's here that the stories of Dangote, China, and Ethiopia intersect most powerfully. Because while their motives differ, one driven by profit, another by partnership, and the third by national ambition, the outcome aligns: Africa rising through production, not extraction. According to African Union Development Agency, AUDA-NIPED 2024, Ethiopia is now considered a continental model for industrial policy discipline, meaning the country has maintained a consistent development plan despite leadership transitions and external pressure. That stability has given investors confidence, not because Ethiopia is perfect, but because it has direction. Even during difficult years of conflict and inflation, the government never abandoned its industrialization blueprint. Instead, it doubled down, investing in energy, logistics, and human capital. It's a lesson that resonates with leaders like Ibrahim Traoré, who have argued that Africa must not be discouraged by temporary instability when pursuing long-term sovereignty. Many African commentators note that Ethiopia's perseverance reflects a deeper shift, the rejection of dependency cycles. For decades, Western loans often came with policy conditions: privatization, austerity, and the dismantling of local industries. Ethiopia instead chose what economists call a developmental state model, a mix of public investment, strategic protection, and targeted partnerships. And China's approach fit neatly into that vision. Unlike Western lenders, Beijing offered infrastructure for productivity, not conditional aid. According to World Bank 2024, over 70% of Ethiopia's industrial infrastructure since 2010 was financed through partnerships with Chinese firms. Critics may call this risky, but for Ethiopia, it's been transformative, enabling a level of industrial expansion that pure market liberalization never could. Still, this transformation faces real tests. Ethiopia must now ensure that its industries don't remain foreign enclaves, but evolve into national ecosystems. That means building stronger linkages between industrial parks and local suppliers, investing in technical universities, and encouraging Ethiopian ownership of future factories. Dangote's model offers a roadmap for that transition. By sourcing locally and employing Ethiopian managers, he has proven that African-owned enterprises can compete globally without sacrificing sovereignty. As the Africa Report 2023 noted, Dangote's cement operations have achieved cost efficiencies rivaling Asian producers, all while paying local taxes and reinvesting profits on the continent. That kind of success story matters because it challenges one of the oldest myths in African economics, that Africans can only consume or extract, not manufacture. Ethiopia's rise is dismantling that myth brick by brick, literally through every ton of cement and every spool of textile yarn. According to IMF regional data, 2024, Ethiopia's manufacturing exports have surpassed $450 million annually, led by garments, leather, and construction materials. It's still a fraction of Asia's output, but for Africa, it signals a new trajectory, one that could, over time, make the continent a serious player in global supply chains. Observers also note that Ethiopia's green industrialization strategy adds another dimension. The government has committed to powering all new industrial parks with renewable energy, mostly hydropower and wind. That means the goods produced in Ethiopia's factories aren't just African-made, they're also sustainably made. As UN Environment Program 2024 highlighted, this positions Ethiopia to attract eco-conscious manufacturing partnerships with Europe and Asia, giving its exports a competitive edge. In other words, Ethiopia isn't just industrializing, it's leapfrogging. While older economies struggle to retrofit their industries for sustainability, Ethiopia is starting from a clean slate, aligning industrial growth with climate goals from day one. But there's an even bigger picture here, one that stretches far beyond Ethiopia's borders. Across Africa, a quiet conversation is unfolding among policymakers. How can we replicate the Ethiopian model while preserving our sovereignty? How do we welcome partners like Dangote and China while ensuring that Africa remains in control of its destiny? The answer, many say, lies in strategic partnership, not dependence. According to the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat, Ethiopia's industrial expansion could become a cornerstone of regional supply chains. Imagine cement from Ethiopia building roads in Kenya, textiles from Hawassa supplying markets in South Sudan, power from the Renaissance Dam lighting factories in Eritrea or Djibouti. This is how Africa's economic borders dissolve, not through slogans, but through infrastructure and trade. And it's why investments from African tycoons like Dangote combined with cooperative partners like China matter so much. They're not simply creating wealth, they're rewiring the continent's economic arteries. Yet the true victory will come when Ethiopian brands stand beside Dangote's on the shelves of African stores, symbols of a self-sufficient continent. When African children grow up watching their parents build, design, and produce, not merely consume. When Africa's stories of progress no longer need foreign narrators, that's the future the industrial leap represents. And if history has taught us anything, it's that nations rise when they refuse to wait for permission. Ethiopia has chosen to rise, it has chosen to build, and now it's drawing others into that momentum, investors who see more than risk, they see potential. According to Bloomberg Africa 2024, Dangote Group has expressed interest in expanding further into East Africa, exploring joint ventures in fertilizer and steel within Ethiopia and Kenya. These sectors, energy, construction, agriculture, are all pillars of long-term self-sufficiency. If realized, they could make Ethiopia not just a manufacturing base, but an industrial anchor for the Horn of Africa. And that's the point often missed in Western commentary. This isn't about replacing one dependency with another. It's about partnerships that strengthen Africa's control over production, pricing, and policy. For China, it's a way to share its industrial know-how while securing stable markets. For Dangote, it's a way to expand Africa's intracontinental production network. And for Ethiopia, it's a way to fulfill a dream long deferred, to become the factory of Africa, not by imitation, but by innovation. As The Economist 2024 observed, Ethiopia's greatest challenge now is to balance growth with inclusivity, ensuring that industrialization lifts all citizens, not just elites. That's the next frontier of sovereignty, economic justice. Because true independence isn't only about producing goods, it's about ensuring that the benefits of production reach every household. If Ethiopia succeeds, it could inspire a wave of similar transformations from the Sahel to the Cape. Already, signs of that awakening are visible. In Mali, gold refineries are being nationalized. In Niger, uranium is being renegotiated under new terms. And in Burkina Faso, under Ibrahim Traoré, resource sovereignty is becoming policy. Ethiopia's industrial path complements these movements. While the Sahel secures its minerals, Ethiopia builds the factories that can process them. Together, they represent two halves of the same African equation: resources plus industry equals power. According to UN Economic Commission for Africa, UNECA 2024, if current growth trends continue, Africa's manufacturing output could surpass $1 trillion by 2030, creating over 20 million new jobs. That's not wishful thinking, it's the trajectory Ethiopia is already proving possible. So, when Dangote and China place big bets on Ethiopia's industrial leap, they're not just betting on a country, they're betting on a continental awakening, a belief that Africa's era of dependency is ending and its era of production has begun. And in that vision, Ethiopia stands tall, not as a follower of others' blueprints, but as an architect of its own destiny. Because the roar of the machines in Addis Ababa is more than industrial noise. It's the sound of a continent reclaiming its voice. And this time, the world is watching, not with pity, but with respect.